they'd returned 6 months before to Romilly-sur-Seine, not to their ancestral home, but rather to a smallish manor house that lay but 2 miles from the chateau. A wealthy merchant lived in their home now, with his fat wife and 6 offspring. Her father hadn't cared. He was pleased to be home, to speak his own language again, to laugh at the things a Frenchman was supposed to laugh at. He'd never really understood the English humour. She imagined, but he'd simply never wanted to take all that was English into himself, and so he hadn't. He spoke English beautifully, but his thoughts were always in French. She wondered what her mother, a very English lady, had thought about that, for surely she knew that her husband would never move his thoughts and dreams toward her. He'd lived for 25 years in Kent, married to the daughter of a local baron, who'd lived with them since he'd lost all his own money gambling. She'd liked her English grandfather. She doubted now that as an adult she would care for him at all, but a child had no such qualifying notions. He'd died before she'd gained an adult's mind, and thus he would be forever a romantic figure in her thoughts. She was the mirror image of her father. She spoke French beautifully, like a native actually, but she simply wasn't French. How to tell her father that she was miserable, that she would die before she married a Frenchman like the Comte de Pouilly, Henri Moreau, a rich, handsome young nobleman who left her cold and rigid, no smile in her mind, much less on her mouth. The evening had been long and trying, largely because Henri, for no good reason she could think of, had determined with appalling certainty that Evangeline would make him the ideal wife. The good Lord knew she had discouraged him, but his hide was thicker than the bark of an oak tree. He wanted her. Every chance he got, he tried to trap her against a wall or against a tree, or push her into the bushes to try to kiss her. He'd managed it once. She'd bitten his tongue. There was a light knock on her bedchamber door. She smiled automatically, rising, for she knew it was her father. He always came to her every night before she went to bed. It was one of her favourite times. She called out in French, because she knew that's what he wanted to hear from her. Entrez. Her father, Guillaume de Beauchamp, the most handsome man she'd ever seen in her life, strode through the bedroom door like a warrior he really wasn't. What he was, she thought, still smiling as he came toward her, his hands outstretched, was a philosopher. Women flocked to him. Even when he spoke to them of the metaphysical underpinnings of Descartes, they usually just smiled at him and moved closer. "Papa," she said, and walked into his arms. Nature had given him the face and body of a warrior. He was magnificent. Few people knew but his heart didn't beat properly, that she worried about him constantly now, for he was 55 on his last birthday, and the English doctor had told her that there was nothing to be done, but he must rest and remain calm. He had said it was a good thing her father was a philosopher, that would keep him seated and thinking. The only problem was that her father became dreadfully excited when he read Montaigne. "Tu es fatiguée, ma fille?" "Oui, papa, un peu." And she thought to herself, yes, she was tired, but she was more than just a little tired. All of her was tired and dispirited. She turned to her maid. "Marguerite, c'est assez, laissez-nous maintenant." And again, as she always did when she spoke French, she thought in English. "Leave us now, that's enough." Marguerite's plump fingers battered a final wrinkle before she gave Monsieur de Beauchamp a lustful look, hummed her good nights, and closed the door after her. They grinned at each other, listening to Marguerite's humming as she walked down the narrow corridor to the 3rd floor. "Ah, papa, assieds-toi." She eyed him closely as he sat on the other chair in her bedchamber. She took a deep breath and said in English, "You had so many of the ladies after you this evening." He sighed, seeming not to notice her shift, and replied in French, "Even if they are with their husbands, they feel compelled to flirt with me. It's very distressing. I simply don't understand, Evangeline. I do nothing untoward to bring them to me." She laughed, unable not to. "Oh, bother, Papa. I have never seen you distressed in my life. You adore the attention, and you know very well that all you have to do to bring the ladies to your side is to simply look straight ahead with no expression at all on your face. You could probably be drooling, and they would still come to you. Now tell me, did you speak only about your philosophers when the dozen ladies told you how very handsome you were?"